This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We end today's show looking more at the recently leaked Pentagon documents, which have revealed secrets about the war in Ukraine, as well as U.S. spying on its adversaries and allies, including Israel and South Korea. The BBC reports one document shows dozens of special forces from Western nations, including the U.S., are operating inside Ukraine. The document, which was marked top secret, says the U.K. has 50 special forces, Latvia 17, France 15, U.S. 14, and the Netherlands has 1. The Pentagon and Justice Department are investigating the source of the leak. On Tuesday, I interviewed James Bamford, a longtime investigative journalist, author focused on the intelligence community. In 1982, he published The Puzzle Palace, the first book exposing the inner workings of the NSA, the National Security Agency, like many times larger than the CIA. His latest book just out is called Spy Fail: Foreign Spies, Moles, Saboteurs, and the Collapse of America's Counterintelligence. I asked Jim Bamford to talk more about what the documents reveal about the Ukraine war, among other issues.
Well, I think it paints a clearer picture of what actually is happening over there. There's been the problem on cable news, both Fox, CNN, MSNBC. You get a lot of people that are pro-war, and they're the members of Congress, senators, and so forth, and they're all giving these upbeat accounts of how well it's going for Ukraine. The documents give a far more realistic view, saying that basically it's going to come down to a stalemate. There is not going to be any big winners necessarily, and the Ukrainians are in a very bad position because they're not getting enough ammunition. The Russians have much more access to ammunition than the Ukrainians do. So there's a switch between the way America perceives the war, I think, to these documents, which give a more realistic, because it's done with intelligence, more realistic view of how the war is going.
There's some interesting findings in these documents that have been released. One, The Guardian points out, one slide suggested a small contingent of less than 100 special operations personnel from NATO members France, America, Britain, and Latvia were already active in Ukraine. Talk about the significance of that.
Well, that's what the Russians have been charging for a long time, that the U.S. is more heavily involved, or not just the U.S., but NATO and our NATO partner countries have been involved far more closely and far more directly with the war than is led to believe by the government, by the Biden administration. So it adds to the weight of those charges that the U.S. and its allies and the NATO partners are more heavily involved in this war. And that's a very dangerous situation, since you've got nuclear powers involved, Russia, the United States, France, and so forth, all nuclear powers, and we're all fighting over this one piece of territory, and it keeps getting more and more out of hand. So I think that's a very big danger.
The New York Times points out military analysts said the documents appear to have been modified in certain parts from their original format, overstating American estimates of Ukrainian war dead and understating estimates of Russian troops killed. The modifications could point to an effort of disinformation by Moscow, the analyst said.
Well, that's a bit of an overstatement. I think what actually happened, I mean, if you read closely, the documents the documents were original. They were placed on the internet in their original form. And then what apparently happened was somebody copied some of those documents, and then they altered a bit of the numerical equivalence of how many died on which side and so forth. So the documents are real. The documents are not disinformation. Somebody apparently took some of those documents, a couple of them, and crudely changed a few numbers. But it doesn't affect the overall value of the documents that were released.
Another point the New York Times makes, the Russian military may be flailing, but the private Wagner mercenary group, led by an ally of President Vladimir Putin of Russia, is flourishing in much of the world. Wagner is working to thwart American interests in Africa and has explored branching out to Haiti, right under the nose of the United States. Jim Bamford.
Well, that's been going on for quite some time. It's not just Russia, it's China has been working hard in Africa to develop. I mean, as the U.S. has been bombing Middle Eastern countries and spending trillions and trillions of dollars on these useless wars, we get into the Chinese and the Russians, to a large degree, have been spending billions of dollars ingratiating themselves with African countries, building bridges, building roads, and so forth. So it's not a big surprise that virtually none of the African countries have joined in the embargo of Russia or the sanctions, and that's why the Vice President Harris flew over to Africa to try to bring back some of that goodwill that we have been squandering while we've been launching wars in the Middle East.